If you like to make your NFL games a little bit more interesting, you've come to the right place. It's the Even Money Podcast with Ross Tucker and Steve Fezzik.
Yeah, Vegas, baby, Vegas. It is the Even Money Podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. Love those dudes. Love those of you that take advantage of the code Ross over at DK Sportsbook, or for that matter, DK Horse. We've got the Belmont coming up this weekend, or how about on the regular DraftKings app for a little best ball? We are giving out free entries to best ball tournaments with me and Joe Dolan on the Fantasy Feast podcast. So just rate and review any of our shows, Ross Tucker Football Podcast, College Draft, Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and then send me the screenshot, ross@rosstucker.com, or take advantage of any of our sponsors like Omaha Steaks or DraftKings or whatever. Send that to me, ross@rosstucker.com, and you get a great chance to be in the best ball draft for free with me and Joe Dolan, my co-host on the Fantasy Feast podcast. This show is called Even Money. We've got the man, the myth, the legend, Steve Fezzik at Fezzik Sports is where you can find him on social media. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Pretty much wherever you guys are, right? Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. What did I miss? TikTok. We are there at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod. All right. So Steve, there's a lot to get to this week because we got all the data from DraftKings regarding how people are betting not only week one of the NFL season, but the entire NFL season. I want to get into that with you. Plus, we got the NBA Finals. So there's a lot to get to. There's some kickoff rule conversation. A lot of conversation. I was at the Eagles OTA last week talking with some of the special teams coaches. They are anticipating a lot more returns, and it sounds like there will be a lot better field position moving forward. So we got to dive into that one more time. I guess before we do anything, Steve, I just want to make sure I don't forget to bring up the NBA Finals. You know, they'll start later this week. Your thoughts, do you have any on the NBA Finals and who you would bet, if you would bet anything, and why?
I think you can only look towards Dallas. So all the stat geeks are going to point to Boston's dominance throughout the season and that they were the much better team. And frankly, that's why Boston's, more than a 2-1 favorite. They're minus like 225 and Dallas is like plus 200 to win the NBA Finals. However, a few key points. We don't know if Boston is going to be fully healthy because we don't know if Porzingis, what his health status is going to be. And Dallas is a completely different team than what they were during the regular season. They rebuilt that team for better defense early in February. And if you look at how Dallas has played just since February and include, of course, the playoffs, my goodness, Dallas faced a much, much more difficult path. Boston, famously, 3 compromised injured teams that they beat up on, whereas the West was, such a tougher road. So I think if you are going to bet the series, I think you have to look towards Dallas, especially if you can get 2-1 in the series, and selectively betting Dallas in individual games.
Love it. Thank you. That's helpful. They do seem like they're playing, that's always interesting, right? You talk about the stat geeks, like in any sport, right? How do you balance the season-long sample size with what we've seen most recently? And I don't know that anybody's ever totally solved for that, Steve. That can be any sport, right? How about the Chiefs last year, right? Like the Chiefs didn't have good numbers all year. The Chiefs were not a great team all year. Then the playoffs came around and they were the best team again, and they won the whole thing. So I don't know that analytics or statistics have really figured that out yet, how to properly weight the entire sample size versus the most recent sample size.
I think the answer is it all depends, right? Team by team, you look at all the LeBron James teams that scuffled through the regular season, and then they had that next level like the Chiefs had last year, the playoff level that they could bring it up. There's plenty of teams like, I think the Denver Broncos with Elway one year started 13-0, scuffled towards the end, but they were clearly the best team and that they wound up winning the Super Bowl. The opposite of, the Chiefs, worrying about the Chiefs, during the regular season. You look at baseball, there was a year the Tigers went 35-5 and basically coasted from that point forward, won the World Series. So it all depends upon the individual teams. I'll say this. I don't trust Boston in close games. I don't trust teams that don't play close games. The analytics people will say the best way to win a championship is to avoid close games because they're such a crapshoot. But you know what? You like to have participated in them. Boston has failed in close games in prior playoffs. Their collars are going to get tight if this is 2-2 and it's a tied game, game 5 with 2 minutes to play.
Well, the only thing I'll say about that is it doesn't seem like there are that many close NBA playoff games. It seems like a lot of them are blowouts.
Terrible NBA playoffs. So, like, the NHL popularity should have surged. Every playoff game is close. Maybe there's an empty goal at the end. Every game is like one goal apart. And in the NBA, teams up 20 at halftime, and they win by 20. It has been just an epic number of blowouts. I don't know how the ratings aren't just cratering in the NBA. Who's watching the second half of these blowouts? I don't know.
What I'm watching, and so are you, Steve, is the numbers in terms of by handle and by bets on NFL games so far this year, courtesy of our friends over at DraftKings. So let's start with that, Steve, because people get access to this data as well. Which is more important to you, the handle or the volume of bets?
Oh, the handle, because it represents the actual physical amount of money being bet. So if 100 people are all making bad bets for $20 each, who cares? As far as ticket counts, I don't really care there's talk that you could fade the public and win. I disagree with that. The only public money that you can fade is big public money. If the public, like in a Super Bowl, this does happen, and the public is backing a team with big dollar amounts, well, it will indeed move the line. Probably the poster child of that is, the Broncos were horrendous in their early Super Bowls. They played Green Bay. People forget that the first Elway championship, Denver was getting double digits against Green Bay. That was public money early on, that was backing Green Bay. Basically, Denver always sucks in the Super Bowl. They lose by 100 to San Francisco, etc. So that can certainly move the number. But I really don't care I care much more about handle than about ticket counts.
Got it. Well, let's take a look at what we've got from DraftKings. Here's what's really crazy. The most bet NFL game since the schedule release came out by handle is the Chiefs at the Steelers on Christmas, Steve. That one surprised me. I'm curious to get your thoughts or your feedback on that one.
That was interesting to me also. My only possible explanation is I think that came out before week 1, so it's just been out there longer for people to play. We were waiting on the week 1 matchups, longer because frankly, it was far enough out that I didn't even really look at it. So that is beyond interesting that I would never have guessed that would have outshined any, the big week 1 games.
I don't know that it has been out that much longer. I'm not sure that's accurate. I mean, it might have been, but all the other games are week 1. So for whatever reason, that Christmas game. So what that tells me, but it's not one of the top 5 by bets. That tells me, Steve, somebody put big money on that game. So somebody had a strong feeling about that game and put big money because it's not one of the top 5 most bet games on DraftKings. Those are all week 1 games. But it is number 1 in terms of handle. So ticket count low, handle high. There's somebody that feels strongly about it, evidently.
Yeah, and what's interesting, pulling back the curtain, we can talk about what the current line is, which I don't have in front of me, but the Chiefs are about 6 points better than an average team, and the Steelers are right around an average team. So I would make that line 6 on a neutral site, which means if Kansas City was home, I'd make them like -7, lay $1.20. If Pittsburgh's home, 1.5 for home field, I make Kansas City only a 4.5 point favorite.
Got it. Taking a look at some of the other games that are the most bet by handle, it's Raiders, Chargers, Rams, Lions, Steelers, Falcons, and Ravens, Chiefs. Is there anything that jumps out to you, Steve, about those four games being the most bet games?
This is almost like Sesame Street, where they used to say, which one of these are like the other, right? And all four of these games are indeed like each other. Specifically, they are lined on 3 or within half a point of 3. So the bettors are trying to get in front of a line move. And Ross, you and I do this weekly. Famously, you love taking plus 3.5 on a game that's going to close 3, or plus 3 in a game that's going to close 2.5. So we've got a situation. We got two different groups opening night. One group likes Kansas City minus 2.5. One group likes Baltimore plus 3. So books are ping-ponging back and forth. Obviously, there's going to be really big handle there. The Atlanta-Pittsburgh game, it was lined at 3. Now it's heading to 2.5. The pros like the dog. They like Pittsburgh plus 3. I like Pittsburgh plus 3, so it doesn't surprise me. Lots of action. And two favorites that I agree with. DraftKings for a long time had the Chargers at home, well, in LA. I don't know if it's home, minus 3 against the Raiders. And they had the Lions minus 3 against the Rams. So think about this. Of course, that's going to be the biggest bet game, or one of the biggest bet games. Detroit is good. Detroit is a contender. The Rams are a slightly above average team. The Lions are home. Minus 3 is too cheap. So as long as DraftKings keeps hanging a minus 3, which they no longer are hanging, there is going to be a tsunami of money on the Detroit Lions. Minus 3, minus $1.10, minus $1.15, and minus $1.20.
Steve, we are 12 days away from Father's Day, which means you got to get a gift for your dad, which means Omaha Steaks. The Father's Day experts just made it so easy to put a smile on his face with hand-selected gift packages starting at just $89. Just go to omahasteaks.com and use promo code EVEN at checkout for an additional discount when you shop gourmet gift packages for Father's Day. Pick from premium proteins like juicy pork chop, air grilled chicken, beefy burgers. Go to omahasteaks.com, promo code EVEN at checkout to save on exclusive packages starting at just $89. Steve and I are dads. We want steak. We also like to wash it down with some beers, which is why we drink Labatt Blue Lights while we're eating our steaks or burgers or protein. Living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. So my one other question, maybe I have more, I don't know, but my other question on these bets, Steve, by handle, that are tinkering around the 3, how do they really know which way it's going to go?
Well, I feel I know which way it's going to go. The sports books don't without taking bets, but I can tell you this. Be very careful looking at a sports book and trying to, based upon their splits, trying to come up with conclusions. Specifically, let's look at that Kansas City-Baltimore game. If one book had been dealing 2.5 their entire time, they'd be telling you, Kansas City minus 2.5 is very much the right side. Every one of our sharps, every single one that bet this game likes Kansas City, 100%. There's not one sharp that likes Baltimore. Well, of course they don't like Baltimore. They're not going to bet Baltimore at your shop at plus 2.5. By contrast, any book that's dealing that game at 3 would say we have zero sharp money on the Chiefs. Every sharp we have in our database that bet this game is betting Baltimore. Well, yeah, because you've got plus 3. Only the only bet side you could consider is the Baltimore side at the plus 3. Personally, I think Kansas City minus 2.5 is the preferred bet. But get this, if you bet minus 2.5, lay $1.10, and you take plus 3, lay $1.10, that's pretty much a break-even portfolio. It's like paying no vig associated with it. And that's why pros love to really dive into these games that are lined like that game at 2.75, 2.5s and 3s out there.
Wow. Speaking of sharp bettors, I know, Steve, you and I were texting recently, and you were making the point that you know, serious bettors don't bet the same on every bet, which is interesting because I think most of my friends, they have an amount they bet. You know, it's either $50 or $20 or $100. Some are actually more than that. One of them who listens to the show or watches the show is way more than that. YouTube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. I tell him to not do that. He does it anyway. I won't say his name, but to my knowledge, I don't know many recreational bettors, Steve, that vary up their amounts. They really just, you know, they bet $100 a game or $50 a game or whatever it is.
And that's what they should do because the recreational bettors are going to lose. So the optimal bet size is 0, but you want to have some entertainment. So you bet whatever is like a small amount for entertainment, $5, $20, $200, whatever your bankroll is. You're not going to win. You're going to have a good time. Hope to basically break even, have a good time, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're a serious bettor, and I get into, passionate, arguments with people, and like they say, well, Steve, how do you know you're right? And I'm like, well, I know I'm right. I'm 100% sure I'm right. And the best evidence I can give is you take 100 statistical mathematical geeks from Princeton and let me not be a school snob and just say Stanford, Princeton, Harvard, Yale, and I'll include Rice and Vanderbilt and all these other places. You get all these stat geeks and you ask them, should you bet flat or should you bet varying amounts? And they'll all, every one of them that's a professional sports bettor will conclude, oh, Kelly criterion, you should bet proportional to your edge. You should spot games you have bigger edges on and bet more on that. Now, it's easy for me to say that. Let me give a concrete example. And we spoke about this. WNBA, Indiana Fever, over under. There were some books that were dealing them at 21.5. Caitlin Clark and company, there's only 40 games. And Indiana Fever won 13 games last year. It was a leap of faith to think that the Fever could go be a 500 team this year, but there was so much Caitlin Clark hype, the number of the book set was above 500 for their projection. Clearly, that was a bet. I know I'm past posting, but I discussed this before the season started. Under 20.5 and under 21.5 wins on the Fever, if you could get down, was like one of the best bets of the year. And ideally, I would have bet 10 times that on that bet what I would have bet on a typical NFL Week 1 game.
So you got to get your Fever down?
You got to get your Fever down to below 500. Exactly.
They were too high. They had too high of a Fever. All right. So that is interesting too. The other thing I think is interesting that I wanted to dive into with you, Steve, is there's been a lot of talk the last couple weeks with OTAs and mini camps in the NFL about the new kickoff rule. And you and I, when they first passed it, we talked about it. And by the way, I have now talked to multiple special teams coordinators about your theory regarding the kickoffs and what they think is going to happen. It's going to be really, really interesting. I had John Fossil on my show on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, the Cowboys special teams coordinator. I've talked to some other coordinators around the league about this. And some of the teams, interestingly to me, are very open about their strategy. You know, like the Chiefs are saying they might use a safety, Justin Reed, instead of Harrison Butker. You know, the Jets said that their statistics tell them there's going to be 100 returns. You know, 100 more returns, which is why they signed Tariq Cohen. It's so interesting because let me just say this, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, Steve. I can promise you, though, if Belichick was still with the Patriots, they wouldn't say a word. They wouldn't say a word about who might be kicking, about how many kicks there might be, about what their strategy might be. And maybe it's just paranoia in New England, but they think information is gold. And the last thing they're going to do is give anyone any extra time with the information. Not only that, in the preseason games, they wouldn't do what they're going to do. They would do the opposite of what they're going to do during the regular season. Anyway, you know, this is a betting show, right? So it has something popped up in your head that makes you want to do anything with totals when they come out, Steve, or anything?
Yeah, and in 2 minutes, I'm going to summarize the optimal strategy every team should utilize and will utilize. and how it's going to impact totals. So scoring is going to increase just under 1 point. It's going to increase totals, better field position. The average starting field position is going to be about the 28.5-yard line. Some teams are just going to choose to smash the ball, kick it into the end zone. They'll let the other team start on the 30. But the savvy teams are the number one thing when you're kicking off. You want to kick the ball to as close to the end zone as possible without it landing in the end zone on the fly. So you want to kick to like the 2 to 5 yard line and having a kicker that's able to consistently smash the ball to that level. Now, height doesn't matter because no one's allowed to move other than the kicker until the ball is fielded or hits the ground. So there'll be 2 kick returners, one on the left side, one on the right side for every team. 9 dudes will be standing the 30 to 35 blocking. They can't move until the ball is caught. The other team, everyone stands on the 40. So think about this. Even if you kicked it by some miracle to the 1-inch line, all right, and there was nobody blocking, you got all these dudes running from the 40, the kick returner running from the 0. He's going to get to the 20 before he's even touched. And that's an optimal kick. So probably we would expect him with blocking and the like to get to almost the 30, but not quite. Now, here's the thing. You don't want a high kick. You want the most ugly, corkscrewing, left-footed, distorted kick that's harder to catch. But with 2 kick returns, I still think most of them will be able to catch the ball effectively. So if you can get a safety, an 11th defender instead of a kicker that can consistently kick the ball to the 5-yard line, that's optimal. But I don't think you're going to be able to do that without him screwing up some kicks. So because of that, I think almost every team is going to have the regular kicker try to kick an ugly ball. Most importantly, make it deep and make it land between the 0 and the 5. The bottom line is the impact on the scoring should be close to a point with better field position.
Steve, the kickers are good. They're really good. I mean, they're going to be able to put it inside the 10, definitely inside the 15, and have it hit the ground probably. I mean, you're going to have really good returners, but because those guys, you know, there's nobody rushing them or anything, they can pretty much put the ball where they want it. I mean, heck, I don't know. I guess, are you only allowed to have 2 returners? I was going to say maybe somebody would have 3. I don't know, but I'd have to look at the rule again. What's that?
Maximum 2 kick returners. One other rule that's fallen under the radar, you get that stupid personal foul penalty for celebrating. It's cool now. Doesn't really hurt you. Because if you have to kick off from the 20 instead of the 35, the kicker can still boom it, you know, to the 5-yard line. It won't change the placement of all the other players. So these egregious celebrations after touchdown penalties aren't really going to impact anything significantly.
All right, so just so I have this right, you believe that where are you getting your numbers for where the start's going to be and the extra point?
Completely back of the envelope, my own estimates. 28.5-yard line. You want to go over or under?
I think over. I think there's going to be teams that are just going to say, you know what? Too much uncertainty. We're kicking out of the back of the end zone. Give them the ball at the 30.
And I do think some teams will do that to prevent injuries and just say, you know what, the edge of kicking to the 2 or the 5 is so negligible, I'm just going to kick out of the end zone. That's a stupid strategy, by the way, because given you're going to kick it into the end zone anyways, why not try to kick just the most ugly, corkscrewing, line drive kick, hard to catch, and have it bounce right next to the end zone? Think about that. It's almost like in tennis. Remember when you're in no man's land and the ball's coming, you don't know if it's going to be in or out? That's a tough call for a kick returner because if it looks like it might land in the end zone, well, then you get it on the 30. But if it lands on the 1-inch line and bounces into the end zone, now you get the ball on the 20. That is the hardest decision for a kick returner to have to make.
Makes me a little bit nervous, Steve, about betting early in the season because this rule, nobody's going to show what they're going to do in the preseason. So the first couple games of the regular season are going to be figuring out what people are going to do, and it could end up being the difference in the outcome of some of these games, which makes me nervous because it's like a variable, it's like an unknown that could affect the outcome that we don't really have a great beat on yet. So that's something that as we get a little bit closer, we need to talk about. Again, we're out of time for today. Check him out on social media at Fezzik Sports. He's the man. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Love those of you that check us out, youtube.com YouTube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Good luck, everybody. Hope you guys win some money this week.
Thanks for tuning in to Even Money. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.